all. We're going to do this in a little bit of a reverse order than we normally do, since you're all here. Any questions?
Mayor Bowser?
Yes.
Obviously, we're all here because we want to ask you about the president's remarks on Air Force One last night. You put out a tweet stating facts about D.C., but what do you say to the President of the United States, who has once again threatened to take over the city that you govern?
Well, Mark, similar to what I've told you on previous days, we will brief the president, give him the facts, work with him cooperatively on our shared priorities and areas where he has concerns. So I've made that offer once again to the White House.
Can I ask you about that? Have you reached out to the White House since his remarks last night? And can you tell us, like, how does that work? Who do you speak to?
I have, and I haven't spoken to anyone yet.
Can I ask you what you think this uncertainty does to that, the bigger picture of the uncertainty of who is going to be running the District of Columbia does to your ability to manage the city? For instance, what would it do to your ability to borrow money?
We don't approach our work with any uncertainty. I was elected. I'm the duly elected mayor of the District of Columbia and the lawful CEO of the District of Columbia. So we don't approach our work with any uncertainty. But having said that, it makes people very anxious. It makes people in our community anxious. It makes our policymakers anxious, our businesses anxious. And that's just an unnecessary distraction. So we want to, as I've said, since President Trump was elected, we want to work on shared priorities with him. He's been busily making changes in the federal workforce. While we want people to come back to work, we've seen some of it, but we've also seen a lot of job loss. So we know that the kind of, how should I say, this clean and safe aspects of what we do in government operations is just as important to us, more important to us, I dare say, than anybody in the federal government. And there are opportunities for us to work together on that. In particular on crime, and we've had many discussions on crime. We had a historic decrease in crime last year. The thing in crime in urban areas is not a thing that you're ever finished dealing with. In fact, you have to keep your foot on the gas to make sure you continue to drive down violent crime, and we will continue to work on that. There's a lot of space for cooperation with the federal government on homelessness, and our focus on homelessness, especially in homeless encampments since the pandemic. We have been methodical in working with the federal parcels and the non-federal parcels to get people into shelter, and we're going to continue to do that. We've had success. Year over year, we cut the number of homeless encampments in half, the number of tents in more than half, and the number of people who are living on the street as well. But we have to keep working cooperatively with Park Service and our agencies and our nonprofit providers to get people into shelter. The good thing that people in the district should know, and we'll make sure the president understands this, is that we have shelter space. We have space in our system for anybody who's on the street. And we want to work, and we work hard every day. It's some of the hardest work you'll ever do is to get people who are living on the street to accept shelter. But we do that work every day.
Mayor Bowser, you mentioned anxiety, which is what a lot of people are feeling. And people are also telling us that they're concerned Republicans have the votes to push forward a federal takeover if they want to go in that direction. If that does happen, whose fault is it?
I'm not sure that I understand your focus. So let me just say this, that the legislative process is more complicated than you've just suggested. And so we continue to work in a bipartisan way on the Hill with members of the House and members of the Senate. That work we've been successful at on many fronts, and we'll continue to do that work.
If I can follow up, we did ask about this yesterday, both the executive order and the Bowser Act. You didn't have much to say on that yesterday. I mean, what kind of pressure are you feeling now to respond and make sure the city residents are hearing you?
My response on the measure at the House is the same. I think, or on the executive order is the same. I think that we haven't gotten any information different from yesterday about an executive order.
Mayor Bowser, I think it's fair to say you've gotten on pretty well with Republican Chairman of the Oversight Committee, James Comer. Mm-hmm. Has he given you any assurances over the past year or so that repealing home rule is off the table for him?
I can say that we have had briefings with the chairman over the course of our relationship since his tenure. We always talk about home rule, and I think the important thing to note is that it is a congressional issue. Home rule is done by act of Congress, and it is in the hands of the Congress.
Has he given any indication which way he stands? It's a far sort of minority who support repealing it until this point.
Well, this is what I can say, and I can't speak for him, but I can say that we keep him up to date on the issues of concern to the members of Congress. Look, most of the people in the Congress know this, that we are a well-run city. We balance our budgets. We have AAA bond rating. We have the #1 park system. We have the fastest improving urban school district. We have broken records for visitation to the district. We just hosted 3 national special security events, 2 snowstorms. So they are familiar with that. Members of Congress have expressed concern, and they've acted as it relates to public safety. But I think they're also aware of the improvements and all of the things that we have done related to improvements in the public policy environment, as well as in an operational sense for public safety. So those are the things that we continue to keep the chairman up to date on.
One more. When you met with President-elect Trump at that time in Mar-a-Lago, did the conversation of taking over D.C. come up, and did you ask him about what he meant by that? Were you serious about that, and did he say anything?
I expressed to the president, and then while I won't talk about everything in specificity, I expressed to the president why our system of government works and why it works best for the people of the District of Columbia. And I would say we left with the impression that his concern was infrastructure and homelessness and, to a lesser degree, public safety.
Question over here. I know obviously home rule didn't happen overnight. I mean, it's been in place for 50 years and there was commissions and councils leading up to this. So in your opinion, is this something that could even that simply just be changed? I mean, what would that even look like?
It's nothing about it, as you all who cover the Congress knows, that getting bills, especially controversial ones, through both houses is never simple. And so I would put a change to home rule in that category. It would have to get through the House, and it would have to get through the Senate.
And then also, just for people that aren't from this area, I mean, explain what's at stake here, because the city government does so much. I mean, you've got public works, you have the education. I mean, everything that you guys do, there's a lot to it.
Of course, there's a lot to it, and that's why it really doesn't make sense for small government people to want to make the federal government become the local government. And we know that it has worked in this city better under home rule than in times where we didn't have home rule. And so we are city, county, and state all at once. We have all of those functions. And so we, as I mentioned, I already talked to you about how people look when they think about well-run cities. What's your bond rating? Do you balance budgets? Do you get clean audits? Are you able to invest in public safety and public schools and transportation? And the answer for us, and we're also, people vote with their feet. We're the fastest growing state in the nation. So those are big things, and we're proud of that. Yes.
Mayor, going off of that, when you went over figures about improving homelessness and public safety numbers like that, is it frustrating when the president comes out and says basically the federal government can run it better than DC's leadership?
Of course it's frustrating, and we think it's also wrong. And so what we want to make sure, and this is what one takeaway I had from my meeting with the president, and one thing I wanted to emphasize to him. President Trump left D.C. at the end of his first term in a COVID environment. And in a COVID environment, I think he still has a picture of COVID era DC. And he returned to a DC that is not the COVID, is very much the post-COVID environment, where the issues with homeless encampments is much diminished, not completely solved, but much diminished from the DC that he left. Similarly, in the year that he was in the year where we saw a spike in crime, much diminished. Not where we need to be, but much diminished. So I think that is certainly up to us, and we're willing to have that fulsome briefing with the president. Yeah.
Thank you. Have you spoken to the president since your December meeting at Mar-a-Lago?
No.
What about people on his staff?
Yes.
And how many times?
Oh, I'm not going to tick off times.
I guess maybe I'll ask the broader question then.
Sure.
Like, do you feel like you have a line of communication to the White House that feels reliable and like they answer when you call?
Yes.
And in the talks about the executive order, I know last week you mentioned that there were discussions, but that you didn't have a ton of clarity on what it would contain. But in those talks that you've been having with the Trump administration, what, if any, promises or commitments have you made in those negotiations about what an executive order might contain?
None.
Okay.
Because we don't know what an executive order would contain. We still don't really know that.
Do you have more clarity this week than you did last week about that?
I don't have any clarity that there is an executive order. I mean, I think they've been talking about a lot of things, but I can't speak to that.
And I guess another broad question, you mentioned it would take a lot, for Congress to, pass that Bowser Act that's been reintroduced. How concerned are you after Trump's comments last night that he could make good on his promise to take over the city? Like, how do you think that will actually happen, and in what form do you think that would take?
Well, first of all, I don't connect his statements with anything in Congress. I don't. I think they're unrelated. And I think what the president said, he said many, many times on the campaign trail. And in fact, I think his comments were reminiscent of the campaign. And so what we take that as an opportunity to do is to make sure he has all the information, and that we collaborate on ways that the federal government can be helpful to us, especially on homelessness. I think there's a lot of areas of collaboration. The chief of police and I have met, but the chief of police and the new prosecutor have worked together on a focus that we think is going to be helpful to fighting crime in the district, and that's a focus on repeat offenders and people who use guns. And we think that focus is going to be helpful, as well as making sure there's a full complement of judges. Once our police are making good arrests, there's some assurance of prosecution and that people will be held accountable. So we're on the same page with that. There is really not a lot of space between us on focusing on holding violent offenders accountable in the District of Columbia.
Mayor Bowser, Nick Ian, LAWTOP News. You mentioned the difficulty of the legislative process in Congress pushing through something like this. So if you could speak directly to residents, do you think that this is a true possibility? A federal takeover is a true possibility at this point, or would the legislative process be too difficult for that to happen, in your opinion? This is
my opinion, is that we have to fight every day for not being in this position. And the only way we're not in this position is when we become a state. as long as we have limited home rule in this city, yes, you have elected officials, but as long as we have limited home rule, we're always vulnerable to the whims of the Congress or a president. And so while right now we're focused on the matters at hand, what I think DC residents know well, that's why they came out to vote over 80% for DC statehood and for us to become the 51st state, is because they understand that as long as we're subject to the whims of the Congress. Okay, who hasn't had a chance? Yes.
Felicia from ABC7. Just a small pivot, because in the midst of this, of course, yes, we had the indictment of the former deputy of ONSC. As of now, have you considered a possible order to halt new contracts as well as review the contracts? And then, if not, are you confident in that process that they have right now?
Well, we already reviewed the contracts. We reviewed the contracts. Gosh, now I'm getting my months mixed up, but it was in the fall. So we reviewed the contracts and we reissued a new solicitation, and I think those contracts have been issued.
Could you talk a little bit about just this indictment? I mean, you did do a review back when the arrest of former Councilmember White happened. But Ms. McDaniel continued to work not just at ONES, but then in your administration up until just a couple of months ago. So it would seem that your investigation, the internal investigation, did not uncover, or maybe, I mean, I'm asking, did your investigation uncover anything about Ms. McDaniel's possibility of being involved in taking bribes for steering contracts? And do you now, if it didn't, do you now think you should revisit that internal investigation because it didn't uncover that?
No, that investigation probably wouldn't, it was not as fulsome as what the investigative agencies have, the Inspector General and the FBI who were investigating it. So it does not surprise me that we did not see evidence of a bribe. But what the investigation did show us, was that this individual probably contributed to a lax monitoring environment, and that's why she was separated.
You anticipated my next question. When you say she was separated, she did not leave voluntarily, she left because of why? Did you ask her to leave?
Yes.
And was it because you knew of the pending indictment, or because
No, it was because of our interviews with staff during the review, the risk management review that I mentioned.
And then if I could go back to the president's statement, you mentioned statehood and that the city will only really be safe from this type of attack when it's a state. Do you feel, we just heard the governor of Illinois have some very stern words about the president, comparing this to the Holocaust and to Nazi Germany in his State of the State address. We've heard other governors come out pretty forcefully against President Trump's actions. You've been walking, and you've been honest with us about you're not going to get on front of a camera every time he does something and have a knee-jerk reaction. But do you feel that your hands are tied because you're not a governor? This isn't a state. The city is so dependent upon federal funding and the control that it has that it doesn't have over the state, that you have to temper your remarks in cases like this?
Well, Mark, my focus is on the district and making sure that the district determines its future. And that's our priority number one. And we are, so I think that's the way we approach all discussions with presidents. It's really, how can we collaborate on the things that make sense, speak out against the things that don't make sense, and read our political environment. So we're always, the district always walks that line. That's nothing new, and so I think that we have I've kind of lost your question now, so I'm rambling a little bit. Did I answer you?
Just wondering,
okay.
Are you afraid to speak freely and criticize President Trump, given the enormous power he has over the District of Columbia?
I'm not afraid, Mark, but I am strategic, and I will continue to be. And I think that's why D.C. residents elected me. My discussion with D.C. residents was, how do we bring our city back from COVID? How do we manage now the political environment that we're in? I've and that's what we're going to do.
Oh, yeah, I'm just in general. The president says a lot of things, making Canada a state, taking over Greenland,
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
Do you think he's just stirring the pot, or you're taking this seriously?
Yes and yes. I think both can be true.
Do you think he's just goading you into acting on the issues that he thinks are most pressing in the city right now?
No, I think that I honestly feel like I don't know. I don't think I can answer that, but I'm not going to be goaded. But I am going to address issues that are, I think that public safety is always going to be an issue of concern for a mayor and the people who live here. So I think that is a shared concern and that we continue to be very focused on. So here's what we haven't talked about in this discussion is all the ways that the federal government can help. And we look forward to having a deeper conversation. I've already talked about kind of the clean and safe beautification issues that the president is very focused on, but they can help. They have lots of parks. They have lots of fountains. They have lots of capital dollars that can go into infrastructure. So they can help. On public safety, they can help. They can make sure we have experienced prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office to work with Ed Martin on our cases, and they can help with making sure that we get judges. They can even help speed up some of our capital projects related to public safety, police stations, DC jail, more cameras. They can help on those things. But there's some things that you may not think about that they can help with, because if the House version of these Medicaid cuts goes through, that's going to hurt not just us, that's going to hurt everybody, but it will also impact public safety. If people aren't getting the medical services, mental health services, services in schools, services in the homeless services sector related to Medicaid, that's going to have a very negative impact on public safety. So that's not just a DC issue. That's a United States issue that I hope that the members of Congress don't cut off their noses to spite their faces and cut these Medicaid dollars that then create more crime.
Just a super quick follow-up to the ONSC. I know you mentioned you did the review of the contracts already. Just with people now hearing two people accused and tied to the agency, what makes you confident in the process now moving forward with the contracts they do have?
We talked very long and hard with our new director that was approved by the council, who has a monitoring and management background on those contracts, and so we're really focused on it. But I want to be clear: the individuals that were found to be trying to influence the process or influencing the process have been rightly handled by the criminal justice system, and we take very seriously our need to safeguard tax dollars and get those much needed services delivered in the community. Thank you.